What up, reader fam? Today I'm bringing you another video in my Books I've Read Recently series. The series on my channel where I share with you the books I've read recently. Now, the last video in this series, I loved a lot of the books that I shared with you, but today that is not going to be the case. I have some books to share with you today that I just felt okay about. I usually really like keeping these videos kind of balanced. I like to share a balanced amount of books that I loved with books that I didn't love, but today I only have books that I felt okay about. So without further ado, let me share those books with you. First up here I have Cat's Cradle by Vonnegut. Jesse read a classic? Look at him go! Changing it up a little bit. He's gonna take on all the classics now. Why is he talking in third person? I don't know, but he's gonna stop now. There is a lot to this story, a lot of complexity, and my description is probably not going to do a very good job of describing what this book is all about. But regardless, I'm gonna take a whack at it. We follow this guy named Jonah who is writing this piece on Mr. Honecker, who helped build the atomic bomb that is responsible for the bombing of Hiroshima. As Jonah begins to write this piece, we get introduced to all these different people who were in some way connected to Mr. Honecker. We see conversations that Jonah has with his children, but also people that worked with him. And this story ended up going in a direction that I was not expecting at all. I took this as a book that Mr. Vonnegut used as a way to kind of share his thoughts on society, which on the back it even says that this is a satirical commentary on modern man and his madness. While this is a rather easy read, I definitely had to dig in order to kind of see a more clear picture of what Vonnegut was trying to do with this book. It's like when you're driving and you get junk all over your windshield. You gotta pull over and get that junk off so you can see the dang road. That was kind of the reading experience for me, except I was less likely to crash into something while reading this book. I just had to use a little bit more elbow grease in order to see what this book was all about and what it was trying to do. One of my favorite parts of this book were all the characters that Jonah comes in contact with. I feel like all the people that he interviews are very strange, and they definitely bring a rather unique element to the plot, especially Honecken's children. Something that I personally was really surprised by was how compelling this story was. From the first page, I was drawn in, and I wasn't super interested in this book. I'll be the first to admit that, but I read the first page in Barnes & Noble and I was hooked. I couldn't put it down. Had I read the description for this book before going into it, I don't know that I'd be interested in reading it. I honestly don't even think I would pick it up. The idea of a story of a guy just going around and interviewing people doesn't sound that fascinating to me. But I was invested right from page one with this book. I will say though that that did not last. I feel like we had built up this momentum, and instead of building off of that momentum and moving the story forward, we definitely plummeted towards the end, and it lost my interest really quickly. Like, that last section just dragged. I will say though that I did like how the story came together as a whole, because there are a lot of things that are mentioned throughout the story that kind of have you going, huh? What? I don't get it. And then you get to the end and all of those what moments kind of come together. They snap into place and make sense. Lastly, I briefly wanted to mention that I found Vonnegut's commentary on religion to be really fascinating. In this book, he has this made-up religion called Bakanin, I think is how you say it, and you could really tell that he was using it as a way to share his commentary on religion. After reading this book, I have a pretty clear view, crystal clear view on how Vonnegut views religion. I definitely don't agree with his views, but it's still nice to kind of hear a different perspective. But I always love hearing different opinions anyways, even if I don't agree with them, which is exactly why when I love a book, I like to read reviews from people who love the book, but also from people who hate the book, because I always love seeing that different perspective. Overall, I think I give this book a 3 out of 5 stars, maybe more of a 2.5. I don't know, I'm kind of in between here. I definitely didn't love it, but it was a nice read to kind of spice up my reading life and to read something completely different from what I normally read. Next up here, I have Sky in the Deep by Adrian Young. This story follows 17-year-old Elin, and she is fighting alongside her Aska clan. One day, they're taking on the opposing side, the Riki clan, when she stops dead in her tracks, because she just made eye contact with her brother who is fighting for the opposite side. But not only that, because 5 years prior, she saw him die before her very eyes. So our warrior here, Elin, is a little confused as to why he's still alive. But not only that, why the heck is he fighting with the other side? How could you do that, brother? So on one hand, she must deal with her brother's betrayal, and on the other hand, she must bring the two clans together to fight against this legendary clan that if they fight against on their own, they will die. I enjoyed this book. It was just not what I was expecting, and that kind of affected my feelings on this book, which I hate. I hate that. I hate when you go into a book with certain expectations and those expectations aren't met, and it leads you to kind of feeling meh about a book, because it's not like it's the book's fault, because you're the one that went into that book with those expectations. So this is more of a it's me, not you. I'll just say outright, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is not a bad rating. It's just not a 5 out of 5 stars. So you might be wondering what I was expecting. So let me tell you, I was expecting loads of action. We do get some nice ones. The ones that we get are lit, but I was just kind of expecting a lot more of them sprinkled throughout about the book. I mean, this is a Vikings book. I want fights every few chapters. I will say, something that I loved was the way the emotions of the characters were written. There are some pretty life-altering things that take place in this book, and I really could feel the shock and the punch to the gut emotions that these characters were feeling. So bravo to the author on writing those character emotions, because they nailed it. Also, something that completely shocked me was the fact that I liked the romance in this book. Excuse me, is this Jesse the Reader speaking? Because he hasn't said that in a long time. But really, it did not feel insta-lovey to me at all. It felt more on the slow burn side of things. Had this book had any other kind of romance in it, I would be side-eyeing it. But the one in this story worked, and I liked it a lot. So one of my other big critiques of this book is that while reading it, I couldn't help but be aware of this feeling that the plot just needed more. We really only have 2 or 3 storylines happening, and I think maybe adding in like a few kind of smaller storylines on the side would have made the story a little bit more complicated, but also maybe the main plot itself just should have been written in a more complicated way. This just goes back to my expectations though. I was expecting more. Also, it felt like a majority of the book, nothing was really happening. They were just kind of hanging around camp, and I'm like, excuse me, can we get some drama up in this camp? Make things a little more interesting up in here? Another thing that I will give this story though is that it did feel really original to me, so props to that. Like I said, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And I do want to point out the fact that a lot of people have been giving this book a 5 out of 5 stars. So I'm a bit of an oddball here. Next here I have an ARC that I got at BEA, and that is Home After Dark by David Small. This book comes out on September 11th, and this is a graphic novel about this boy who is just facing all sorts of adversity throughout his life. His mother left him at a young age, his father neglects him, and he also deals with bullying. We follow his journey to finding purpose in a life where he just feels completely worthless. This is not an easy read when it comes to the material that it covers, though that is kind of one of the big critiques that I have for this book. And I feel like it's something that I've been noticing with a lot of the books that I've been reading recently, and it's that they cover these really dark topics and they don't really dissect them very well. They just kind of brush over them without digging deeper, which I totally get. Not every book can take on these topics and really get to the core of them, but I've just noticed it in a lot of the books that I've read recently, and I hate to say this because it sounds really harsh and I don't mean it in a mean way, but it just feels like lazy writing to me. And that's not an attack on this author specifically. There have been lots of books that I've read recently that have just kind of brushed over topics and not really delved into them. In fact, something that this author actually did a really great job of was tackling the topic of bullying. We really see the effects that bullying has on people, and also the horrific events that can come from being bullied. But we have all these other things that are mentioned about this character and his life and things that he's endured, and we don't ever see the effects they have on the character. And I kind of find issue with that. I hope that I explained myself well enough with that. I feel like I didn't explain myself well at all, but I just feel like this book could have gone so much deeper. But at the same time, I also understand that this was a very slice of life kind of story, so we're not really able to see how our main character is affected by everything that he endures. Now, something that I really liked about this book was the illustration style. I liked that it kind of had that sketch style with a watercolor overlay, but also maintaining that black and white effect. I ended up giving this a 2 out of 5 stars. Next up here, I have a book that I quite enjoyed, and that is The Universe is Expanding and So Am I, the sequel to The Earth, My Butt, and Other Big Round Things by Carolyn Mackler. This book takes place 5 months after the first book, and we follow our main character Virginia, and we get to see the aftermath of a certain event that took place in book 1, which is just a messy situation all around. I do want to point out that there is a trigger warning for this book with rape, so be aware of that before picking it up if you decide to pick it up. This was a really thought-provoking book, just like book 1 was. Our main character is in a very confusing situation. In fact, I have no idea how I would handle the situation that she finds herself in this book. We see how she's kind of altered her thoughts on different people in her life, and also just kind of how she has to make adjustments to her life. And she must figure out a way to move forward and move on from what's happened. Book 1 is really focused on Virginia kind of accepting the body that she's in. And in this book, we have a Virginia who is just very comfortable in the body that she has. And it was really nice to see that, especially because in book 1, we see her just torture herself over her body. Though I will say there was a moment in this book where I was just really confused because Virginia makes a comment about another woman's body. And it just kind of caught me off guard because it felt like it went against everything that Virginia had learned about herself and about body image in the first book. We see Virginia herself endure body shaming in the first book, and she kind of makes a stereotype comment about somebody's body in this one, and it just felt very out of character. It felt like everything she had learned had just completely disappeared in that moment. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I guess you also have to recognize the fact that just because somebody has learned something doesn't mean they've completely changed themselves. Everybody is still a work in progress in life, but It just felt weird. I was just a little confused, I'm not gonna lie. The last thing that I want to comment on in this book is the romance. It was a big ol' no for me. I just didn't like that the relationship was used as a way to bring some plot points together. Was not a fan of that at all. If you've read this book, you probably know what I'm talking about. But overall, I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend checking out book 1 and book 2 if they sound interesting to you. The last book I have to share with you is Solo by Kwame Alexander. I have been pronouncing his name as Kwame Alexander. I'm the worst. And this book was also written with Mary Rand Hess, whose name is super small on the cover. I hate when they do this. This is a big pet peeve of mine. I hate when one author's name is completely bigger than the other author's name. And maybe Mary didn't have that much to do with this book, but if you want to give credit, at least make her name bigger, equally as big as Kwame's name. This story follows this boy named Blade, and his father is this big-time rock star that nobody takes seriously. He's constantly doing all these terrible things that end up in the tabloids and entertainment news, and everyone just assumes that Blade is going to end up just like his father, even the parents of the girl that Blade loves. But realistically, the only thing that Blade and his father have in common are their shared love of music. One day, a secret is revealed that makes the distance between Blade and his father grow even larger. This book is written in verse, which is always kind of a hit or miss for me. Very few books that I've read in this format have hit it out of the ballpark, and this one had potential. Like the first 50 pages, I was sold. I was excited. I was like, I found another book written in verse that I'm going to love. And before I say this next thing, let me be clear here. The writing style was gorgeous. Like, it was poetic goodness. So the format of this book was not the problem. It was the plot. I was really frustrated with the overall direction of this story. Something that I really didn't like was the secret, which was the big plot twist. It's just something that I've seen too many times. I can't say what it is, obviously, because it would spoil the whole story. But it just makes me uncomfortable because I feel like if I were what the twist is involved with, which is very vague, I just don't feel like I'd be okay with this twist. I don't know though. Maybe I'm wrong. I love the music in this story though. There are music references throughout this book, just tucked in the pages, and that was just really fun to see. I will say though that I wasn't a big fan of Blade's music. Blade writes music throughout the story, and we get a peek at a few of his songs, and some of them just had me cringing hardcore. Basically, the lyrics had me rolling my eyes. Specifically, like one of the very first songs that we see from Blade, I was just like, seriously? This is not very good. I did feel incredibly bad for our main character though throughout this story. He deals with so much surrounding his father, and he's kind of the one that has to face the consequences and has to deal with it. And it's this really bad pattern that his father has gotten in. So not only does he have that terrible thing in his life that he constantly has to deal with, but he also has to deal with the fact that the media is constantly like pestering him about it. Something that I wish would have been axed from this story was the relationship. I really didn't like the relationship. A, his girlfriend was a flat character. B, their relationship was incredibly toxic, which led Blade to making terrible decisions. And C, I just really felt like the relationship was built on lust, which is never a good thing. Another thing that I did like about this book though is how everything kind of came together in the end. It kind of wraps up in a really great way. Actually, great is not the word, devastating way, but that's kind of what I liked about it. It made me feel something. Overall, I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. So those are 5 of the books that I have read recently. You guys should let me know down below in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to hear your opinions, especially if you have an opposing opinion. Let me know. I respect opposing opinions here, okay? Or if you haven't read any of these books, just let me know some books that you've read recently and what you thought of them. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. I post videos frequently on this channel, so if you want to see more bookish content from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and click the little bell icon and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thanks for watching guys, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye, chew.